Hollywood gave you a ghost story. They gave you a jump scare, a happy ending, and a family that walked away into the sunset. But Hollywood lied. The movie The Conjuring was a PG-rated fairy tale compared to what actually happened in Harrisville, Rhode Island. The Perron family didn't stay for a weekend. They didn't stay for a month. They lived in that house for 9 years. 9 years of psychological warfare, 9 years of watching their mother deteriorate, and 9 years of realizing that some things cannot be exorcised. January 1970. Roger and Carolyn Perron were looking for a fresh start. 5 daughters, a limited budget. The Arnold Estate seemed like a miracle. 200 acres of sprawling woods, a massive 14-room colonial farmhouse dating back to 1736. It was cheap, suspiciously cheap. As they moved the last of their boxes into the house, the previous owner did something strange. He didn't hand over a list of local handymen or the mail schedule. He looked Roger in the eye and said 8 words that should have changed everything. "Leave the lights on at night. For the girls." The Perrons laughed. They thought it was a joke about old house creaks. By the second night, nobody was laughing. It started with what they called the sweeping every morning. Roger would walk into the kitchen to find small, neat piles of dust in the center of the floor. He hadn't swept. Carolyn hadn't swept. It was as if an invisible maid was trying to maintain the house. But the kindness ended there. The smells came next. The scent of rotting flesh, thick, cloying, like something had died behind the walls. They would tear apart the floorboards looking for a dead rodent and find nothing. And then the bruises. The 5 daughters, Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April, started waking up with deep, thumbprint-sized bruises on their arms and legs. Someone was pinching them. Someone was marking them. This wasn't just one ghost. The Arnold Estate was a transmit station. The girls began to see them. They called them the Gray People. One was a small boy who liked to play with their toys. Another was a man who stood in the corner of the cellar, watching Roger work on the furnace. But as the months turned into years, the entities became more distinct and more aggressive. The youngest, April, began talking to a spirit she called Rory. She said Rory was sad. She said Rory lived in the wall. But the Gray People were nothing compared to the woman in the gray dress, the one with the broken neck, the one who hated Carolyn. To understand the horror, you have to understand the soil. The Perrons began to research the history of the house. They found a record of death that defied logic. 2 suicides by hanging, 1 suicide by poison, the murder of an 11-year-old girl, 2 drownings in the nearby creek, and 4 men who froze to death on the property. The house wasn't just haunted, it was a graveyard with a roof. And at the center of this web was one name: Bathsheba Sherman, born in 1812. A woman who lived on the property in the 1800s. Local legend claimed she was a practitioner of the dark arts, that she had sacrificed a child to the devil. Whether the legends were true or not, something in that house believed it was her. Now, ask yourself, if this was happening to you, would you stay? Most people say no. They say they'd leave the same night. But the Perrons were trapped by a different kind of monster. Financial ruin. They had poured every cent into this house. They couldn't sell it. Word had gotten out. The haunted house label made it a dead asset. They were prisoners of their own mortgage, and the entity knew it. Bathsheba didn't want the family gone. She wanted the family dissolved. She began a campaign of displacement. She wanted to replace Carolyn. She wanted to be the mother of those girls. She wanted Roger to be her husband. And she was willing to kill Carolyn to make it happen. 1973. The Warrens arrive. The world-famous demonologists, the experts. But here is the detail the movie conveniently forgot. The Warrens made everything worse. Roger Perron hated them from the start. He felt they were showmen looking for a headline. But Carolyn was desperate. She was losing her mind. The Warrens concluded that the house was experiencing a demonic infestation. They decided to hold a seance. Roger didn't want it. He begged them not to. But the Warrens moved forward in the dark of the cellar. And that night, the house screamed. They sat in a circle. The air temperature dropped so fast the windows frosted over. Carolyn began to tilt back in her chair. Her eyes, they didn't just roll back. They turned flat. She began to speak in a voice that sounded like grinding stones, a language no one in the room recognized. And then, the physics of the world broke. Carolyn's body was lifted out of the chair and slung 20 feet across the room. She hit the wall with the sound of snapping bone. Roger screamed. He lunged at Ed Warren, punching him square in the face. He threw the Warrens out of the house that night. But the damage was done. The seance hadn't sent Bathsheba away. It had given her permission. The Warrens left. The cameras left. And the Perrons were left alone in the dark for 6 more years. This is the part Hollywood doesn't show. The normalized horror. The family learned to live with the spirits. They knew which stairs to avoid. They knew that if the smell of rotting meat appeared, they had to leave the room immediately. They watched their mother become a shell of herself. Andrea Perron later described it as living in a waking dream. The boundary between the living and the dead had become transparent. The girls would see the gray people sitting at the dinner table with them. The entities weren't visitors anymore. The Perrons were the visitors. 1980. They finally move out. The house is sold. But the story doesn't end there. The current owners of the house, they've turned it into a 24/7 live-streamed investigation. And the footage is bone-chilling. In 2021, a ball was caught on camera moving on its own in the nursery, the same room April Perron used to play in. In 2023, thermal cameras caught a human-sized heat signature standing directly behind a researcher in a room that was physically empty. It wasn't Bathsheba. It wasn't a demon. The theory now is much darker. The land itself is a sinkhole, a place where the veil is naturally thin, a place that feeds on the energy of whoever lives there. Roger and Carolyn are older now. They rarely talk about the house, but the daughters do. Andrea Perron wrote 3 books about it. She says she doesn't believe in ghosts. She knows they exist. She says that even now, 40 years later, in her quiet home in another state, she sometimes wakes up in the middle of the night. She smells that faint, sickly scent of rotting meat, and she feels a cold, invisible hand pinching her arm. Because the Arnold Estate doesn't let go. It just waits. Did you remember to lock your door tonight?